Jimmy Fallon was asking Michael Chen about his journey from addiction to becoming a counselor, when something in the young man's composed expression suddenly shattered. The 29-year-old recovery advocate, who had been confidently discussing his work with at-risk youth moments before, began trembling in his chair. "Jimmy," he said softly, his voice breaking, "I started using drugs when I was 15, and by 25 I was dying in a dumpster behind a gas station." The Tonight Show studio, which had been celebrating his transformation and advocacy work, fell into stunned silence. Michael's confession transformed what had seemed like an inspiring recovery story into something much darker and more desperate. Jimmy's admiring smile faded as he realized this wasn't just about overcoming challenges. This was about surviving a descent into hell. It was June 22nd, and Michael had come on the show to discuss his non-profit organization that helps teenagers struggling with addiction. The interview had been going beautifully, with Michael articulating the importance of early intervention and peer support. But when Jimmy asked what drove his passion for this work, the professional facade Michael maintained finally cracked. "I was a straight-A student when I started," Michael continued, his voice barely audible. "My parents thought I was perfect." The contrast between his promising beginning and devastating addiction was stark and heartbreaking. The studio fell into complete silence. Jimmy's face showed shock and growing empathy. The audience seemed frozen, confronted with the reality that addiction could claim anyone, even the most promising young people. "What happened at 15? Jimmy asked gently, his voice full of compassion and concern. "How does a straight-A student end up?" He couldn't finish the sentence, but Michael understood. "Wisdom teeth surgery," Michael replied, the mundane beginning of his nightmare almost absurd. "They gave me Percocet for the pain." His voice carried the bitter irony of a medical treatment that became his destruction. "I loved how it made me feel," he continued, describing the seductive nature of opioids. "For the first time in my life, I wasn't anxious about everything." The medication had provided escape from internal pressure he couldn't otherwise manage. Jimmy leaned forward in his chair, his entire focus on this young man, whose story represented thousands of similar tragedies. "When did you realize you had a problem?" he asked carefully, understanding the progression was likely gradual and devastating. "When the prescription ran out, and I started buying pills from dealers," Michael replied, marking the transition from medical patient to street drug user. "Within 6 months, I was spending my college fund on OxyContin." The speed of his descent was both shocking and typical of opioid addiction. "My parents thought I was just stressed about school," he continued, describing how addiction hides behind plausible explanations. "I got really good at lying about everything." His ability to maintain deception had enabled his continued drug use while destroying family trust. The audience was completely silent now, understanding they were witnessing something that transcended entertainment. This wasn't just one man's story. This was the opioid epidemic personified in someone young enough to be their son. The cameras captured every emotion crossing Michael's face. "How long did the prescription pills last?" Jimmy asked softly, though he suspected the answer would lead somewhere even darker. Michael's response confirmed his fears. "About 2 years," Michael said, the timeline marking his progression through high school. "Then they got too expensive." The economics of addiction had driven him toward more dangerous alternatives. "That's when I switched to heroin," he admitted, the transition that claimed so many lives reduced to simple financial necessity. It was cheaper and stronger. The cruel mathematics of street drugs had sealed his fate. Behind the scenes, producers were grappling with how to handle this unprecedented confession. This wasn't entertainment. This was someone sharing the most devastating period of their life on live television. They recognized the importance of letting Michael's story serve as both warning and hope. "How old were you then?" Jimmy asked, understanding that Michael's youth made his story even more tragic. The answer was devastating in its implication. 17, Michael replied, describing an age when most teenagers worry about prom and college applications. "I was shooting up in school bathrooms." The image of a high school student injecting heroin was shocking and heartbreaking. "My grades collapsed. I lost all my friends. My parents kicked me out, he continued, describing the systematic destruction addiction causes. By 18, I was living on the streets. The progression from straight-A student to homeless addict had taken only 3 years. Jimmy made a decision that would define this moment. He stood up from behind his desk and walked over to sit next to Michael, abandoning the traditional interview setup. "Michael, how did you survive 7 years on the streets?" he asked gently. "I almost didn't," Michael replied, looking directly at him with eyes that had seen too much for someone so young. "I overdosed 3 times. His survival seemed miraculous given the statistics of street addiction. The first time, paramedics revived me in an alley," he continued, describing near-death experiences that had become routine. "The second time, another addict found me and called 911. His life had depended on the compassion of people society had written off. The third time should have killed me," he said, his voice growing quieter. "I was alone for 6 hours before anyone found me." The isolation of his final overdose highlighted the ultimate loneliness of addiction. The vulnerability in his words was staggering. Jimmy reached over and gently placed his hand on Michael's arm. "What was the turning point? What made you decide to get clean?" "I caught my reflection in a broken mirror behind a dumpster," Michael said, the moment of clarity both profound and devastating. "I didn't recognize the person staring back at me." His description of self-recognition lost was haunting. "I saw a monster," he continued, describing the moment when self-awareness broke through addiction's denial. "Sunken eyes, infected arms, weighing maybe 90 pounds. The physical degradation had finally penetrated his consciousness. That night, I made a choice," he said, his voice growing stronger. "I could die as this monster, or try to find the person I used to be." The decision to seek recovery had required confronting his complete transformation. "How did you get help?" Jimmy asked, understanding that accessing treatment while homeless and addicted presented enormous barriers. Michael's answer revealed both desperation and determination. "I walked into an emergency room and told them I wanted to die," he said, describing the honesty that finally opened doors to treatment. "A social worker named Maria changed my life. The human connection had provided the bridge back to hope. She didn't judge me or lecture me," Michael continued, describing the approach that had reached him when others failed. "She just asked what I needed to feel human again." The simple recognition of his humanity had been revolutionary. The audience was visibly moved by Michael's story, many people crying as they recognized their own family struggles with addiction. His experience was creating space for understanding addiction as disease rather than moral failure. "What was recovery like?" Jimmy asked, recognizing that getting clean was only the beginning of rebuilding a life. Michael's description was both hopeful and realistic. "The hardest thing I've ever done," he said honestly, avoiding any suggestion that recovery was simple or easy. "Detox was hell, but learning to live sober was harder." His honesty about ongoing challenges was important for others to hear. "I had to rebuild everything," he continued, describing the comprehensive nature of recovery. "Trust with my family, basic life skills, even how to have normal conversations." The addiction had arrested his development at 17, leaving him to learn adult skills in his 20s. "My parents didn't believe I was serious at first," he admitted, revealing the skepticism that greets recovery attempts. "I'd promised to get clean so many times before. The broken trust required years to repair, not just months." "What made this time different?" Jimmy asked, understanding that many people attempt recovery multiple times before succeeding. Michael's answer revealed the internal shift that made lasting change possible. "I finally admitted I needed help with more than just drugs," he said, describing the comprehensive approach that worked. "I had underlying depression and anxiety that I'd been medicating. The mental health treatment had addressed root causes rather than just symptoms. And I found purpose in helping other people," he continued, describing what sustained his recovery long term. "When I started volunteering at treatment centers, I realized my story could save lives." His transformation from patient to advocate had given meaning to his suffering. The studio erupted in applause, but it wasn't celebratory. This was recognition of survival, appreciation for honesty, and hope for the thousands of families affected by addiction. The standing ovation acknowledged both his personal triumph and broader struggle. "Tell me about your work now," Jimmy said, wanting to focus on Michael's current mission. His description of helping others was passionate and purposeful. "I work with teenagers who are where I was," he said, his voice strong with conviction. "I can look them in the eye and say, I know exactly what you're going through." His credibility came from lived experience rather than textbook knowledge. "Every kid I help get clean is like facing my old self and winning," he continued, describing the psychological healing that came through service. "It's how I make peace with the monster I used to be." His redemption was tied to preventing others from following his path. "What would you say to parents who might be dealing with this?" Jimmy asked, recognizing that many viewers might be struggling with their own children's addiction. Michael's advice was both practical and compassionate. "That addiction is a disease, not a choice," he said with conviction born from experience. "Your child isn't weak or bad, they're sick." His reframing could help families respond with treatment rather than punishment. "And don't give up," he continued, offering hope to desperate parents. "I was written off by everyone, including myself." His survival proved that recovery was possible even in seemingly hopeless cases. They talked for a few more minutes about treatment, about the importance of addressing underlying mental health issues, and about the support systems that make long-term recovery possible. Michael was more articulate and inspiring than any expert who had discussed addiction on the show. When the interview ended, something remarkable happened. Addiction treatment centers reported increased calls from both addicts seeking help and families looking for resources. Michael's story had literally saved lives by encouraging people to seek treatment. "I never thought sharing my story could help this many people," Michael told Jimmy backstage, overwhelmed by the immediate response. "Maybe almost dying was worth it if it prevents other kids from going through this." His perspective on suffering as potentially meaningful was profound. The episode aired exactly as it happened, with Michael's story resonating far beyond entertainment. Recovery organizations used his testimony to advocate for treatment funding, and families found hope in his transformation. Within months, Michael's organization had received substantial donations and expanded their youth outreach programs. His willingness to share his darkest moments had multiplied his ability to help others avoid similar paths. The Tonight Show established regular segments about addiction and recovery directly. Because of Michael's appearance, they featured stories of families affected by addiction, treatment innovations, and most importantly, hope for recovery. Jimmy learned something profound that June night that changed how he thought about second chances and human potential. "Michael showed me that no one is beyond redemption," he reflected later. "Sometimes the people who fall the furthest have the most to offer those who are falling." Michael Chen's addiction recovery story became more than a viral moment. It became a catalyst for conversations about treating addiction as a health issue rather than a criminal justice problem, and proof that recovery was possible with proper support and treatment. Years later, Michael would say that sharing his story on live television was as important as getting clean. "That night, I stopped being ashamed of my addiction and started being proud of my recovery," he reflected. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is show others that change is possible. The lesson of that extraordinary June night was profound. Sometimes our greatest failures become our most powerful tools for helping others, and sometimes the most broken people become the most effective healers.